This video is for my AP class to kind of have the experience of me translating it and going through the text like we would in class, except since we didn't have time, this is a text that you read over Christmas break. I figured we should save class time, and you can watch it on here if you don't really know what's going on and you want me to explain some of the grammatical things and also hear me translate it. So that's kind of my goal here, and I guess we should get started. This is Caesar's De Bello Gallico, Book 5, Chapter 40. We get started right at the beginning here. Mituntur id Caesarem confestim ab Cicerone literae magnis propositis praemiis si pertulicent obsessis omnibus viis misi intercipiuntur noctu ex materia quam munitionis causa comportaverant tures ad modum centum duodecem excitantur incredibili claritate, quae de esse opere videbantur perfeciuntur. All right, so let's get started with checking out the grammar. We see we have our verb right away. We have our verb right away up here. We see ad Caesarem, which is a preposition. Confestem, meaning immediately. And we see another preposition, ab Cicerone, and we had a passive verb, so that means this is probably going to be agent. Litera is the first thing that we see that can be the subject, with magnis propositis praemiis. It looks like an ablative absolute with our participle here. Magnis going with praemiis. I think we have to bracket that off as an a squared. Then we see si pertulicent. That's going to be another clause, so we can bracket that off. And we notice it's in the subjunctive, in the pluperfect, so it's probably a contrafactual statement in the past. Okay. Contrafactual meaning it didn't actually happen. It's if something would have happened, or if it had happened. So we're going to take a look at that when we translate. You'll hear the difference. Obsessis omnibus viis, that's going to be another ablative absolute. We see this is a participle here, obsessis is, and omnibus viis is our ablative subject, so we have another a squared here. Misi, which is a participle, does not really agree with anything, so it actually is a substantive participle, and just like you have a substantive adjective, you can have a substantive participle as well, and it's going to be taking the place as a subject of the intercipiuntur right next door here. Okay. Noctu is actually an adverb. It looks a lot like the noun nocte, which would be the ablative of place where, but this is actually just the adverb, different part of speech. It means the same thing, it just means kind of at night, during the night. We move on, we see ex materia. Ex materia is a preposition, and I would end it here after our ablative, but quam modifies materia, so we have to actually keep it going. We have to start a clause inside the preposition. And I think quam is going to be the direct object of whatever comes next, whatever verb it comes with. Munitionis is a genitive, and it's going with causa here. And we've seen this idiom a lot to express purpose in Caesar, so I hope this isn't a mystery. It doesn't have the genitive gerundive this time, but it still expresses the purpose just like before. And then we have our verb comportaverant, which is pluperfect, and it ends our quam clause in true Caesarian fashion. And with that, this actually ends the preposition ex materia as well. Now, this adverb noctu and this preposition ex materia are both adverbs going with our clause down here, which begins with noctu but continues after the preposition and relative clause with tures. So tures is going to be the subject of the upcoming verb. Ab modum is an interesting adverbial expression, and it's going with the number here. I'll talk about that. You'll see when it translates, it's more or less an adverb modifying an adjective. And we'll see that when we translate. It'll be pretty obvious. Excitantors are verb, and we move on to incredibili claritate as our ablative of manner. Okay, so it's how they're doing the excitantur, and you'll hear that again when I translate. Now, quae here, after the semicolon, starts a clause, and it looks like it's going to be a connecting relative, but it's not. It's actually going to start a noun relative clause. It's going to be the subject of our main verb. Okay? And it ends at the verb here, because we read deesse, that's an infinitive. The quae can end at deesse. We see opere is our dative, and this is our verb of the quae clause, and here's our verb of the main clause. So the quae clause is the subject of this, and that's just everything we have in our clause, so we can keep going, we can translate. Now, deesse and opere kind of go together because deesse takes a dative as a compound verb, and the opere here is our dative. You see our compound verb, so we have our dative with a compound. Okay, and you can just listen as I translate. I'm not going to write it because I don't want to take too much time. We start up top. We've already done the grammar, so if I jump around in the Latin, which I'll try not to do as best I can, but sometimes for English it's necessary. The letters were sent to Caesar immediately, confessed them immediately, by Cicero ab Cicerone, with great rewards having been offered if they had brought them all the way through. And in other words, we already know that it didn't work with that. If they had done it, great rewards were offered. Obsessis omnibus vis is another absolute. So with all the roads having been watched, and we're assuming by the Gauls, those having been sent, and there's our substantive participle, were intercepted. They were captured on the roads when they were sent out to Caesar. All right, so no Roman messenger getting through. We see noctu at night from the material which they had brought together for the sake of fortification. That's munitionis causa, for the sake of fortification. The turrets, all are literally 120 of them, were built with incredible speed. And now we go to this last clause. The things which seemed to be lacking from the work are completed. I wanted to point out that this last clause is it's very interesting because they're doing it with such speed. I feel like there was something missing. If they didn't get all 120 made right away, he says perfectiontur. It finished. It was finished. It was completed, and that's actually quite the accomplishment. In one night, they built 120 towers. And that's what the ad modum is doing up here. With this word here, it's actually telling us, as Caesar said, it's literally 120 towers built. And that is a pretty impressive piece of work. So kudos to Cicero and his comrades for doing that. And we're going to kind of read a little bit in the next next couple chunks about the things they were going through at the time. So let's keep going. Ostes pastoro die multo maioribus coactis copiis castra appugnant fossam complent. Eadem ratione qui pridie ob nostris restititur. Hoc idem reliquis de enceps fit diebus. Okay, so here we have ostes being either a subject or a direct object. We don't know yet. Postero die is an ablative of time. We can see that pretty clearly because die means day. Molto here is an interesting one because it is ablative, and because maioribus comes right after it, it's right next to a comparative. This is actually an ablative of degree of difference. And that just naturally kind of goes with comparatives, and it just kind of says how much more than. So if we have this is greater, this is much greater, molto. So that's really all it's doing. Coactis copiis. So molto maioribus coactis copiis is an ablative absolute, as we see here with copiis is our ablative noun and coactis is our ablative participle. We are good to go. Castra appugnat. Now we can make a decision on ostes and castra now, because they can both be nominative plural or accusative plural, but the difference between one and the other would be that enemies can fight while camps cannot. Usually the enemies are attacking camps. Camps are not attacking enemies. So we're going to say the enemies are attacking the camps, and that's going to mean that this is the subject up here, hostes, and castra is the direct object. Here's our verb. Okay. Fossam complent. Very easy sentence. Do verb, and we can move on. Eadem ratione. This is usually an ablative of means, unless it's an ablative absolute, and I think it is here with our verb down there. Qua pridie. That's an interesting relative clause, and we're going to talk about. I'll talk about after I explain it in the translation. But basically, you're gapping in our verb from the main clause. Okay. And pridie is an adverb going with that gapped verb. Ob nostris is a preposition, and here, since it's with a passive verb, we're going to say it's agent, and that's holding true. And then resistitur, which is a passive verb, as I just said. Hoc idem is our neuter noun here. Actually, just a series of pronouns, but it works. Reliquis is just kind of hanging out there. Dienceps fit diebus. We see that reliquis skips a few words here and goes with diebus, and it's a little bit of a hyperbaton, because it's kind of just broken word order a little bit. I don't know. It doesn't really follow a natural pattern where reliquis and diebus should be next to each other. It's just not, so we got a little bit of hyperbaton here. And then dienceps is an adverb, fit is our verb. Okay? So that means a hoc idem, since there's nothing else, is our subject. All right, so let us read. The enemies on the next day, with a much greater force, or many greater forces having been brought together, they attack the camps, and they fill the ditch. And the ditch goes around the winter camps as part of protection. And I mentioned that in the first slide, so if you want to go back and look at that, go ahead. But there's a ditch that surrounds the wall on the outside, so that enemies have to climb uphill at the wall and at those sticks that stick out to prevent them from running too fast. Eadem ratione here is, like I said, an ablative of means. So we have it was resisted by our guys with the same method, and ratione here isn't as much reason as it is method, with which they resisted them. Pridie means the day before. Okay, so it was resisted by our men with the same manner with which it was resisted the previous day. The same thing happened in succession, DN caps, one after the other, in the remaining days. And we're moving on. Nulla pars nocturni temporis ad laborem intermittitur, non aegris non vulneratis facultas quietis datur, quaecumque ad proximi die appugnationem opus sunt, noctu comparantur. Multae praeustae sudes magnus muralium pilorum numeros instituitur, tures contabulantur, Pinae lauricae ex cratibus attexuntur. All right, we'll get started right away with nulla pars. Nulla is an adjective modifying pars. Pars means a part, and then we have our genitives part, and then this is our whole. So this is a genitive that's a part of a whole, or a partitive genitive. Ad laborem here is our preposition, and intermittitur is our verb. Okay. Non aegris, I see a dative ablative here, but since it's referring to people, I'm thinking it's got to be dative, and I'll hopefully confirm that in a minute. Non vulneratis, again, with a dative, we see a parallel non-dative. There's a parallel construction there. Facultas is then the subject, since that's nominative, and quietus being the genitive is probably modifying it. And then datur is the verb. And datur means to give. That confirms my suspicions that aegris and vulneratis are datives. Quaecumque ad proximi die. Quaecumque here begins a noun result clause. As it is the whole clause here. I'll put a subject next to the bracket. It is the subject of this verb down here, comparantur. We'll get to that in a second. We see ad, that's a preposition. Proximi die, the genitives, going with appugnationem, which is the accusative that is required to go with the ad. Opus sunt then ends our noun result clause. And like I was just saying, this whole clause is then a substantive clause that goes with comparantur. So it's the whatever things. The quaecumque is then kind of starting the clause and acting as the subject of comparantur. And noctu is, of course, our adverb. It's the same thing we saw in the last passage there with noctu being the adverb at night. Multae praeustae sudes. Here we have a list of nominative subjects with adjectival things modifying them. We see numeros with magnus and a couple genitives here modifying it. And you get our verb here. So these are the subjects, here's our verb. But you'll notice that the verb is actually singular, instituitur. And this is because it's not as much that it's these things and these things, okay? It's more along the lines of... it's going with numeros being our singular subject, and you're gapping it up here as a plural verb going with sudes, okay? So we're just doing a little bit of gapping here. Tures contabulantur, that's going to be another clause. That's just a subject-verb combination. Pinae lauricae is our subject of attexuntur, and ex creatibus here is our preposition going with that. So let's get the translation started. No part of the nighttime was ceased for work. In other words, they worked all through the night. The faculty of rest is not given, or is given not to the sick, not to the wounded. Whatever opus sunt is a necessity. Now, opus can mean work, it can also mean a necessity here. So whatever is a necessity for the fighting of the next day, That's the ad proximi die appugnationem. So whatever is a necessity for the fighting of the next day is prepared at night. Now we go to the next part here. Many stakes having been burned. Now, this is referring to, if we look at this picture down here, these, actually, I don't think it's on this picture, but it's, they had these stakes that were sharpened, and what they would do is burn the ends to harden them. And because if they wasted metal on tips, it would waste resources. So they burned the ends to make them a little harder. So they had these sharpened sticks that had burnt ends to make the ends impactful. They were prepared. They were made, and that's going to be that verb instituitur. All right. Constructed, if you will. A great number of wall javelins. Now, wall javelins are heavier than spears, and they're more intended to be thrown down rather than thrown up and across at people. So that's why they were a little heavier. So a great number of wall spears were made as well. Tures contabulantur. That's going to be the towers were built, they were stacked up, and we can see here in our picture, this is where I'll start labeling things, here are our tures, okay? Pinnae, loricae, and this is where there's going to be some unknown English vocabulary as well. A pinna is actually this part of the wall right here. And what this does is protects the soldiers, and it goes all the way across, actually. It protects the soldiers inside the camp, but they can kind of peek over right here in between and throw things down. Now the loricae... Oh, sorry, I got this confused. The loricae are these right here, so I'll actually even label. This is the loricae. Now these little guys jutting up here, these are the pinnae. Okay, and these are called merlins in English. That's actually an English word for these little jutting up sticks that you see. And loricae in English, these are called parapets. In English. So we can say the merlins and parapets. So the merlins and parapets, they were woven together from wicker. And you can see here that it's made of sticks. So that's why I put this picture on here so you can really get an image. Because if I told you that the pinnae were merlins and the loricae were parapets, you would have no idea what I'm talking about. But seeing the image, I think, helps. All right, let's keep going. Ipse cicero cum tenuissima velatudine esset, ne nocturnam quidem sibi tempus ad quietem relinquebat, ut ultro militum concurso ac vocibus sibi parcere cogeretur. Okay. We see our subject right away, ipse cicero, Cicero himself. We know this is all nominative, so we can just put a giant S there, and then we start bracketing because this is the fun part. Cum here starts a clause. We do have an ablative right afterwards. However, we also have a subjunctive, so we can't just assume that that is a preposition. And we see here our superlative going with valetudine. This is going to be an interesting ablative use with a verb to be, and we've talked about this in Book 6 a little bit, I believe. Or is it Book 1? I think we might have seen them in both. But we'll talk about that when I translate. But suffice to say, we should get ready for an ablative of description. Ne nocturnam quidem. Okay, so ne is usually a negative ut clause, but when it comes two words before quidem, and it sandwiches something that it's emphasizing, then that is a whole different thing. This is not a clause marker at all anymore. It becomes an adverbial thing. It just means like not even the thing that you sandwiched, okay? Not even nocturnum, and I'll translate that accordingly. Sibi is our reflexive in the dative, and we keep moving. We see tempus, which is probably going to be our subject. It could be a direct object, but we will see. But wait, we already have a subject, ipse Cicero. So we are assuming tempus is our direct object, and I think we are right. I apologize for the initial reaction. Ad quietem is our preposition. Relinquebat is, of course, our verb going with Cicero up there, and tempus. Then we see an ut. Ut begins a clause for sure. And we see ultro militum. Militum is our genitive. Concursu is an ablative as well as vocibus. So this connects to ablatives. Sibi is our dative. I don't know what that's doing until I see the next word, parcere. I know that takes a dative object, so I'm going to then go ahead and label that as a dative object. That's one of those words that just takes a dative object. And then cogerentur naturally takes an infinitive, and we see parcere there, so that's nice too. Okay? Okay, here we go. So Cicero himself, although he was of very weak health, and notice how we translate the ablative as an of, although he was of very weak health. It has to do with the description of Cicero at the time. It's an adjectival thing, and it's with the verb to be, okay? These are clues, but basically the ablative description is really one of the only ablatives, and if not the only ablative, that is adjectival. So that's why we know that that's an ablative description with the verb to be there, with Cicero being our subject. Okay? So now we keep going. Ne nocturnum quidem sibi tempus ad quietem relinquebat. So Cicero himself, although he was of very weak health, he left for himself not even nighttime for rest, in order that, and there's an ut clause's purpose, the reason he did not give himself any time to sleep, in order that he be forced to spare himself voluntarily by the movement, the running together and voices of the troops. All right, and that does it for this passage. Stay tuned for the next one.